For 3 decades, Michael Landon's secret cabin sat locked and forgotten, with vines covering the windows and its door shut tight. People in the area whispered about what could be hidden inside. When someone finally found the key, what they discovered was way more shocking than anyone thought possible. The real question is, what secrets could Landon have been keeping all this time? Stay with us to learn the surprising details. Deep in the woods, far away from Hollywood's bright lights, there stood Michael Landon's secret cabin. For 30 years after he died, nobody went inside. Vines had grown all over the windows, the door was sealed shut, and local people whispered about what might be hidden in there. The cabin became like a legend, a place where the silence got heavier and heavier with each year that passed. Michael Landon's sudden death in 1991 shocked everyone. At just 54 years old, the beloved actor, director, and producer who brought to life classic shows like Bonanza, Little House on the Prairie, and Highway to Heaven was gone. His fight with pancreatic cancer happened fast and was really hard, leaving his family, fans, and co-workers heartbroken. People magazine wrote about how sad everyone was, and interviews later showed how, even his last days, Landon acted with grace and a quiet strength that inspired the people around him. But the cabin he left behind was different. It wasn't a TV set, not part of the world he shared with millions of people. It was private, locked up, and forgotten by everyone, except a few people. When the key was finally found decades later, what was inside amazed everyone. Dusty shelves still held his personal stuff, old photographs, and letters written by hand. Among these things were confessions about private struggles, fears, regrets, and thoughts he never shared on camera. Some talked about feeling lonely even when he was super famous. Others hinted at pressures he carried quietly for years. For fans who only knew the smiling, heroic Michael Landon, the cabin showed a deeper, more real side of the star. It held the key to unlocking secrets that shaped every choice he made later in his life. Michael Landon was born Eugene Maurice Owowitz on October 31st, 1936 in Forest Hills, Queens. His family background was complicated in many ways. His father, Eli Maurice Owowitz, was Jewish, while his mother, Kathleen Peggy O'Neill, was Irish Catholic. Religious differences and prejudice shaped his early years, making him feel like an outsider. When the family moved to Collingswood, New Jersey in 1941, they became one of the very few Jewish families in that area. Landon later remembered how hard those years were, especially after his bar mitzvah, when he faced mean remarks and anti-Semitism from other kids who singled him out for being different. But the most painful wounds from his childhood came from inside his own home. His mother, Peggy, struggled with serious emotional problems. She tried to kill herself more than once, leaving scars that Michael would carry forever. One disturbing memory stayed with him his whole life. During a beach vacation, his mother tried to drown herself in the ocean. Michael, just a kid at the time, was the one who pulled her to safety. It was a terrifying moment, both scary and life-changing. From then on, he lived with the fear of losing her and the burden of responsibility that no child should have to carry. Adding to his pain, Michael also had trouble with bedwetting well into his childhood. His mother didn't respond with kindness, but with humiliation. She would hang his wet sheets outside the window for neighbors to see, an act of cruelty that left him deeply ashamed. The shame from those nights never left him, and years later, he turned the experience into his semi-autobiographical TV movie, The Loneliest Runner, which he wrote, directed, and produced. The film told the story of a boy who runs home each day to take down the wet sheets hung outside by his mother, turning the pain into art that spoke to countless others who carried private shame. These experiences planted both wounds and determination. Growing up in a home full of secrecy and silence, Landon learned early on that appearances could hide deep pain. His ability to show both strength and vulnerability on screen was born from this truth, while fans saw him as a confident, heroic person in shows like Bonanza and Little House on the Prairie. The roots of that toughness came from a boy who had to be brave long before he was ready. Looking back, it makes sense that Michael Landon's later life was filled with themes of family, redemption, and struggle. The harshness of his early years shaped his deep empathy, but also gave him an inner drive to escape, to succeed, and to prove himself. Every insult, every night of shame, every tear he wiped away after saving his mother became fuel for his ambition. The cabin he left, locked for so many years, would later show personal belongings and hidden letters. But the true beginning of his story was already written in the painful silence of his childhood. Let us trace his change from athlete to actor and see how early pain became fuel for fame. Landon's early life, marked by family problems and shame, seemed like the story of someone meant to be broken. Yet instead of letting those wounds define him, Landon found an outlet for his energy and anger, and that was sports. In high school, he became a really good javelin thrower. By 1954, his talent reached amazing levels. That year, his throw was recorded as the longest by any high school athlete in the whole United States. It was a moment of victory for a young man who had grown up in a home filled with fear and humiliation. On the field, Landon was no longer the boy weighed down by family secrets. He was strong, focused, and admired for what he could do. Many people who knew him then believed he had a future as an Olympic-level athlete. For a while, Landon believed it too. The dream of leaving behind his painful past and making a name for himself in sports seemed possible. But fate had other plans. An injury ended those hopes, crushing his dream of athletic glory. For a young man who had put so much of his identity into sports, the setback was crushing. Yet it was also the turning point that forced him to find a new path. With his Olympic dream gone, Landon turned his restless energy toward performance. He began trying out acting, first in small roles and eventually in auditions that pushed him closer to Hollywood. His birth name, Eugene Maurice Owowitz, didn't seem right for show business. Early in his career, he tried the stage name Michael Landon, but when he found out another actor was already using it, he searched for something new. The story goes that he flipped through a phone book looking for names that started with the letter L. He stopped on Landon and paired it with Michael. That choice, which seemed small, gave him the identity that would one day be recognized in millions of homes. Landon's big break came in 1957 with the film I Was a Teenage Werewolf. From there, opportunities in westerns began to open doors. Hollywood in the late 1950s and early 1960s was filled with western-themed TV shows and films, and Landon's rugged good looks and natural charisma made him a perfect fit. Slowly but surely, he built a reputation as an actor who could show both intensity and vulnerability on screen. He wasn't content with being cast in the same type of roles. Behind the scenes, he studied the craft of writing and directing, eager to shape stories rather than just act in them. The locked cabin from his later years symbolized the parts of his life he kept private. But in these early days, the transformation from Eugene Owowitz to Michael Landon was about stepping into the spotlight. He was no longer the humiliated boy or the failed athlete. He was becoming a performer with dreams that stretched far beyond just acting. But what happens when one of the biggest stars on TV in Bonanza starts getting more than just scripts? When he begins to shape his own future? Let's reveal how Michael Landon grabbed control of his career, and became TV royalty. By the late 1950s, Michael Landon had gone from struggling young actor to a rising star, but nothing could prepare him for the life-changing role that would cement his place in television history. In 1959, he was cast as Little Joe Cartwright in Bonanza, a Western drama that would become one of the longest-running and most beloved shows of its time. Bonanza was more than just another Western. Set on the huge Ponderosa Ranch, it told the story of the Cartwright family, widower Ben Cartwright and his three sons as they faced the challenges of frontier life. Landon, as the spirited and often hot-tempered Little Joe, quickly became a fan favorite. His youthful energy, charm, and ability to bring vulnerability to the role gave audiences someone to root for. Families across America tuned in every week, and soon Bonanza wasn't just a TV show. It was a cultural phenomenon. For Landon, however, Bonanza was more than a paycheck or fame. It was a classroom. He spent years watching how scripts were shaped, how directors built episodes, and how producers handled the business side of television. By the mid-1960s, Landon was no longer happy to simply say lines. He began writing scripts himself, proving he had a talent, not just for acting, but for storytelling. His episodes often carried strong themes of morality and family values, reflecting his personal belief in stories that had meaning. As he grew in confidence, Landon stepped into directing. He brought a fresh style to episodes, focusing on character depth as much as action. His creative involvement grew until he was making production decisions alongside the show's leaders. To his co-stars, Landon was fearless when dealing with network executives. He wasn't afraid to fight for what he believed would make the show better. This determination sometimes made him a challenging person behind the scenes, but it also earned him respect. He was seen as someone unwilling to compromise on quality. Bonanza's success was rooted in its unique blend of adventure and moral lessons, the sweeping landscapes, stories of justice, and deep bonds of family connected not only with American viewers, but with audiences worldwide. By the late 1960s, Bonanza had become a television staple, and Landon was one of its brightest stars. His role as Little Joe made him recognizable in nearly every household, but his work off camera was setting the stage for an even bigger future. The success of the show, however, couldn't last forever. In 1972, tragedy struck when Dan Blocker, who played Haas Cartwright, died suddenly of a pulmonary embolism. His death shook both the cast and the loyal fans of the show. Blocker had been a central figure, and without him, the chemistry that made Bonanza work was never quite the same. Ratings began to drop, and by 1973, the series came to an end after an amazing 14-year run. For Landon, the end of Bonanza marked both a loss and an opportunity. He had spent over a decade learning the business, sharpening his skills, and proving himself not just as an actor, but as a storyteller with vision. Now, with the Cartwright chapter closed, he was ready to take the lessons from the Ponderosa and build something of his own. Let's now go into his little house on the prairie and highway to heaven, where Michael Landon wanted not just success, but meaning. By the early 1970s, Michael Landon was no longer just a face on television. He was shaping stories, pulling strings behind the camera, and crafting the kind of programs that would leave a permanent mark on American television. His greatest chance to build something of his own arrived with Little House on the Prairie, which premiered in 1974. Landon wasn't just playing Charles Ingalls, the gentle, hardworking father of a pioneer family. He was also the heartbeat of the production. He wrote scripts, directed key episodes, and oversaw the vision of the show. Many actors are remembered for a single role, but Landon made sure Little House was more than entertainment. He used the series as a platform to address subjects rarely touched in family television at the time. Racism, addiction, poverty, and abuse. He wanted audiences to feel something deeper, to confront uncomfortable truths, even while gathered together in their living rooms. Week after week, viewers tuned in not only for the heartwarming stories, but also for the moral lessons woven into the plot. Families struggling across America saw their own hardships reflected back to them, softened by hope and resilience. Behind the scenes, Landon's work ethic was legendary. He insisted on perfection, pushing cast and crew to deliver performances that felt true. This drive made him a respected leader, but it also came with its own shadows. Landon's career never slowed. Just a year after Little House ended, he launched another series, Highway to Heaven. This time, the show took on an even more spiritual direction. Landon played Jonathan Smith, an angel sent to Earth to help people in need. It was a role filled with hope, love, and redemption, a stark contrast to the turmoil of his personal life. Many believe the show reflected Landon's own search for peace, shaped by the wounds of his childhood and the desire to pass along something uplifting to millions of viewers. Let's dig into Landon's marriages, his dual roles as father and public figure, and the scars that remain behind closed doors. Behind the glow of television lights, Michael Landon's private world was far more complicated than the characters he played. He had 3 marriages, each leaving a different mark on his life. Story. His first marriage to Dodie Levy Fraser began in 1956, a partnership that seemed steady at first but ended in divorce 6 years later. Soon after, in 1963, Landon married Lynn No, the woman with whom he would share nearly 2 decades and raise a bustling household. Together, they built a family that blended biological and adopted children, 9 in total, creating the picture of stability the public believed in. But stability was fragile. On the set of Little House on the Prairie, Landon's growing closeness with Cindy Clerico, a young makeup artist, began to stir whispers. She was only 18 when they met, and their connection soon crossed the line into an affair. For a man who had become America's father figure, this was more than a private choice. It was a scandal. When the truth spread, it broke not only his marriage to Lynn, but also his carefully built public image. The fallout was immediate. Cast members noticed the shift in atmosphere. Karen Grassel, who played Caroline Ingalls, later spoke of the tension that lingered after the affair became known. Melissa Gilbert, who had seen Landon as a second father, was crushed. The man she trusted, the man who had guided her both on screen and off, suddenly seemed like a stranger. Their bond broke apart, leaving Gilbert with a wound that would take years to heal. Although they did reconcile somewhat before his death, the distance between them remained a reminder of choices that came at great personal cost. Still, Landon stood firm with his decision. After divorcing Lynn No in 1982, he married Cindy Clerico in 1983. They went on to have 2 children together, and despite the controversy, he defended his right to pursue happiness on his own terms. To his fans, however, reconciling the virtuous Charles with Landon's real-life scandals proved difficult. Then comes Landon's final days, and they teach us about courage, regret, and legacy. In the spring of 1991, Michael Landon's life took a devastating turn. While vacationing in Utah, he was struck by a piercing headache that wouldn't go away. Soon after, doctors delivered the crushing news: pancreatic cancer. The disease had already spread, making surgery impossible. For a man who had always seemed larger than life, the diagnosis was a shocking blow. Landon faced his illness with the same determination that marked his career. He began chemotherapy, enduring one round with the drug fluorouracil, but quickly realized the side effects outweighed the slim chances of success. Instead, he turned to holistic treatments, looking for comfort and hope in alternative paths. Yet, his daughter Leslie later admitted that her father's health had never been his priority. He ignored symptoms, postponed checkups, and brushed aside the warning signs his body gave him. By the time he sought help, it was already too late. On July 1st, 1991, at only 54 years old, Michael Landon died at his Malibu home, surrounded by his family. The loss was felt across America. Fans mourned the man who had brought warmth into their homes as Little Joe, Charles, and Jonathan Smith. Friends and colleagues remembered his intensity, his creativity, and his restless drive. Yet his legacy didn't end with his passing. His children have carried his memory forward, speaking about his courage and sharing lessons from his life. Charitable efforts, especially those raising awareness for pancreatic cancer, became part of the family's way of honoring him. And through reruns and streaming platforms, Landon's shows still reach new generations, keeping alive the values of family, hope, and resilience he cherished. Michael Landon's story ends in grief, but also in something more lasting. His locked cabin is more than a place. It is a symbol of secrets, laughter, and the memories that live on long after death. From a mystery of his locked cabin to the legacy he left behind, his life continues to inspire and fascinate people. But what do you think? Was Landon's true legacy his work, his family, or the mysteries he kept hidden? Share your thoughts in the comments.